Two boys vanish during a hike. 10 months later, a helicopter captures a shocking discovery that changes everything. You must join our channel and hit subscribe, because only those who never give up hope for the lost will do it before this story begins. The late afternoon sun dipped low behind the dense canopy of Black Pine Ridge, casting long shadows that flickered like restless spirits among the towering pines. The air was sharp with the bite of early autumn, carrying the scent of damp earth and fallen leaves. Somewhere deep in those woods, two boys were missing. The town of Eldridge held its breath. Sheriff Cole stood at the edge of the forest, the weight of responsibility heavy on his broad shoulders. His eyes, tired but determined, scanned the tree line where the boys, Lucas and Ethan, had vanished just hours before. A graying beard framed his weathered face, etched with lines earned from years of facing hardship and quiet loss. His voice was steady, but beneath it lay a simmering urgency. We've got to find them before nightfall. This forest isn't forgiving after dark. He barked the orders to the assembled volunteers, whose faces flickered with fear and hope. Among the crowd, Jake's hands clenched into tight fists. His heart thudded painfully in his chest, each beat echoing the terror that gnawed at his insides. He couldn't tear his gaze from the tree line where his younger brother and his best friend had disappeared. 14 years old, two boys full of dreams and reckless courage, now swallowed by the wilderness. The thought was unbearable. Jake's mind raced, replaying the morning's events with vivid clarity. The boys had slipped away just after dawn, whispering plans of adventure and secret discoveries. Lucas's mischievous grin, Ethan's eager nod, the crackling sound of their footsteps fading into the dense forest. Their objective had seemed innocent enough. Find the old abandoned cabin, the one whispered about in town stories, rumored to be haunted. But now the cabin was a dark mystery, and the boys were ghosts. He pushed past the crowd, his voice hoarse but firm as he called out, "If anyone finds anything, anything at all, please, tell me. Please." His gaze swept over the anxious faces of the volunteers, but no answers came. Sheriff Cole caught Jake's eye and approached quietly. "Jake," he said, his tone gentle but commanding, "we're doing everything we can. I promise you we won't stop until they're found." There was something in the sheriff's eyes, a mixture of hope and dread, that mirrored Jake's own fears. Jake nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. The forest around them seemed to close in, the wind whispering through the branches like a warning. Jake's thoughts twisted darker as the minutes stretched. What if the stories were true? What if something unnatural lurked beyond the trees? Something no one dared to name. His chest tightened. He pushed the thought away, focusing instead on the search. Hours passed with fruitless calls and frantic footsteps. The sun sank lower, the sky deepening into a bruised purple. Jake's lungs burned from yelling his brother's name, the cold seeping into his bones. Each crack of a twig made his heart leap, only to settle into crushing disappointment. The volunteers' voices began to falter, their hope dimming like the fading light. But Jake refused to give in. Not yet, not ever. His determination was a quiet flame burning against the growing darkness. Later, as the search party reluctantly retreated to regroup, Jake stood alone at the edge of the woods. His eyes traced the jagged horizon where shadows thickened, and a bitter resolve hardened within him. "We'll bring them home," Jake promised, his voice steady but his heart pounding with fear. 10 months had stretched into a long, aching silence for the town of Eldridge. The forest seemed to swallow the days whole, its dark canopy holding secrets that gnawed at the edges of every conversation. Jake sat at the edge of his small kitchen table, his eyes locked on a faded map sprawled before him. Yellowed journal pages, scrawled with hurried notes and rough sketches, were scattered around like fragments of a broken puzzle. His fingers trembled slightly as he traced a route, the path the boys might have taken that day, each line a faint thread of hope. His jaw clenched, and a tight knot of guilt twisted deep in his chest. If only I had kept a closer watch, he thought, heart heavy. If only I'd stopped them from going. The weight of that failure pressed down relentlessly. Across town, Sheriff Cole sat stiffly in a meeting room at City Hall. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a cold glow on the council members who surrounded him with impatient eyes. "Sheriff, it's been 10 months," one man said, voice clipped. "We need to consider ending the search. Resources are stretched thin, and the community's confidence is fading." Cole's face was a mask of steady resolve, but inside, the burden of responsibility grew heavier by the day. He glanced out the window at the dense forest, the place that held his own doubts and fears. "I understand the concerns," he replied evenly. "But until we have proof, we owe it to the boys and their families to keep looking." Meanwhile, miles above the earth, a chopper sliced through the cold blue sky. Marcus, a seasoned pilot with a steely gaze hardened by years flying treacherous terrain, adjusted his headset and scanned the controls. The hum of the rotors was steady, a familiar rhythm in his ears. Today was supposed to be routine, an aerial survey for the town's planning committee. But as the helicopter banked over Black Pine Ridge, Marcus's eyes caught a flicker, something shifting beneath the thick canopy near the ruins of the old cabin. He reached for the camera mounted beside him, fingers steady despite the unexpected surge of adrenaline. The lens zoomed in, focusing on the shadows where a figure slipped between trees. The image on the screen was grainy, blurred by the thick foliage, but unmistakably human, a lone shape moving with cautious intent. Marcus felt a chill creep up his spine, a whisper of unease mingled with curiosity. "What on earth is that doing out here?" he muttered under his breath. Back on the ground, Marcus's call to Sheriff Cole was tense but urgent. "Sheriff, you need to see this," Marcus said, his voice low but firm, his tone betraying the flicker of excitement beneath his professionalism. The sheriff leaned over the photo Marcus sent, a pixelated figure cloaked by shadows, caught in a frozen moment. His brows furrowed deeply as 1,000 questions flooded his mind. If the boys had survived this long, why hadn't they come back? What dangers had kept them from finding their way home? Jake, who had been hunched over his maps moments before, snapped to attention when Cole arrived at his door, phone in hand and a grim look on his face. "You need to see this," Cole said, thrusting the photo toward him. Jake's breath hitched as he stared at the faint image, heart pounding with a reckless surge of hope. "It's them," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "After all this time, they're still alive." But beneath that flicker of hope, Cole's expression darkened. He knew the forest held more than just lost boys. The silence that had lasted months wasn't empty. It was waiting, watching. And whatever had hidden Lucas and Ethan for so long wasn't ready to let go. "We have to investigate," Jake said, gripping the photo tight. The morning air hung thick and heavy in the small hangar where the helicopter waited, its metal frame gleaming faintly under the dull light filtering through the high windows. Jake tightened the straps on his backpack, the weight grounding him as his mind spun with everything Marcus had just told them. Sheriff Cole stood nearby, methodical and calm despite the tension that threaded through the air like electricity. Marcus's voice broke the quiet, low and serious. "The radio interference out there isn't normal. It's more than just static, signals drop out, frequencies overlap. It makes communication nearly impossible." Jake's brow furrowed, his fingers tapping nervously against the side of his pack. "You're saying if something goes wrong?" His voice faltered, swallowed by the heavy silence. Marcus nodded, a hard edge to his tone. "Exactly. During the flight, I felt it. Like someone or something was watching me. Not just the altitude chill. There was a presence, just out of sight. It kept me on edge the whole time." Sheriff Cole's eyes darkened as he absorbed the news. "We need to be prepared for whatever we might face. It's not just a missing persons search anymore." His voice was steady, but Jake caught the tension tightening his jaw. The burden of responsibility weighed heavily on him. Jake swallowed hard, swallowing the growing knot of fear in his chest. His desperation clawed beneath his ribs, fueled by the image of his brother lost somewhere in that vast, silent forest. He glanced at Marcus, the pilot's face unreadable but determined. Here was a man used to danger, yet he spoke with a seriousness that chilled Jake more than the cool morning breeze. The three men gathered their gear, the clatter of supplies sharp in the stillness. Jake's mother's earlier warning echoed in his mind. Her trembling hands, the worry etched deep in her eyes when she had whispered, "Please be careful, Jake. Don't let the darkness take you too far." He had brushed off her concern then, but now it felt like a shadow creeping closer. The town council's voice rang in his ears too, a mix of fear and caution. They urged restraint, worried the search might stir trouble better left undisturbed. Yet Jake's resolve hardened. Every moment without Lucas and Ethan was a moment lost, a risk he was unwilling to accept. As Marcus loaded the last of the supplies into the helicopter, Jake stood by the open door, staring out at the dense canopy of Black Pine Ridge that stretched endlessly beyond the clearing. The trees seemed to lean in, whispering secrets in the wind, their branches twisting like the tangled thoughts in his mind. He clenched his fists, feeling the rough fabric of his gloves beneath his fingers. The weight of the unknown pressed on him, but beneath it all burned a fierce determination. "We'll find the truth, no matter the cost." The helicopter sliced through the pale morning sky above Black Pine Ridge, its engines humming a steady, tense rhythm that matched the tight grip Jake had on the seat beneath him. The dense forest below stretched endlessly, a thick, rolling sea of green treetops muffled by swirling wisps of mist that clung like ghosts to the branches. Marcus's hands were steady on the controls, his eyes sharp as he guided the aircraft lower, weaving through the fog with practiced ease. Beside him, Sheriff Cole's gaze scanned the ground, his jaw tight and brows furrowed, while Jake's heart pounded louder with each passing second. Suddenly, Marcus's voice cracked through the thick silence. "There, something's moving near that clearing." His tone was sharp, edged with disbelief and cautious hope. Jake leaned forward, every nerve alert, eyes fixed below where the canopy gave way to a patch of earth. Between the swaying trunks and tangled underbrush, two figures darted quickly, their movements fluid but desperate. Jake's breath caught in his throat. "Lucas! Ethan!" he whispered, disbelief breaking through his dread like sunlight piercing the forest gloom. His fingers clenched the window frame until his knuckles whitened. Sheriff Cole's eyes narrowed, muscles tensing as the helicopter banked slowly to keep the figures in view. But then, crack! A sharp sound sliced through the quiet, echoing from the shadowed woods below. The boys froze, stiffening as if caught in a trap. Then, without warning, they scattered, breaking into the shadows like whispers fleeing a storm. The forest swallowed their forms with unnatural speed. Jake's stomach twisted painfully as a tall, shadowy figure materialized from the edge of the trees, moving with eerie silence. The man, or something like a man, stood motionless, watching. His outline was sharp against the dark green, tall and broad-shouldered, a silhouette that seemed too still to be human. Every instinct screamed that this was no ordinary person. Marcus reached for his radio, voice urgent. "Ground teams, do you copy? We've got movement near the clearing." But his words were met only by crackling static, the kind that swallowed calls whole. He tried again, desperation creeping into his voice, but the forest answered with silence. The radio line was dead. "Damn it!" Marcus muttered, frustration etched across his face. "It's like the woods are blocking everything." Jake's hope warred with growing dread. What had kept Lucas and Ethan hidden all this time? What darkness had they run from, and why had they stayed silent? His mind raced, flashing through every nightmare he'd buried since their disappearance. The boys were alive, yes, but at what cost? Sheriff Cole's steady presence was the only anchor amid the swirling storm of fear and uncertainty. His eyes met Jake's, silent communication passing between them. This was bigger than a simple rescue. "Hold on," Jake whispered, voice trembling yet fierce as he gripped the window frame tighter. "Hold on." The helicopter dipped low, its blades chopping the thick, humid air as Marcus circled the dense clearing once more. Below, the forest canopy pressed inward, dark and impenetrable. Jake's eyes scanned the tangled underbrush frantically, heart pounding like a drum against his ribs. Every rustle of leaves, every shifting shadow seemed alive with silent threat. The shadowy figure they'd spotted remained perfectly still, a dark silhouette blending so seamlessly with the ancient trees, it might have been a part of the forest itself. Jake's breath hitched, his gaze locked on the figure, searching for any sign of movement or recognition. Sheriff Cole's hand tightened around his sidearm, knuckles whitening with tension. His eyes were sharp, scanning the edges of the clearing with cautious suspicion. The unease in the air was thick, like a storm waiting to break. Jake could feel it deep in his bones. The forest was watching them back. Then, as if swallowed by the very earth, the shadowy figure vanished. No snap of a twig, no rustle of leaves, just an eerie silence that settled like a cold fog over the clearing. Marcus's hands tightened on the radio's microphone.
Come in base.
Do you copy? He called out, voice sharp but tense. Only static answered, crackling with a hollow emptiness that gnawed at Jake's nerves. The isolation was complete.
No reinforcements. No backup.
Just the three of them, surrounded by ancient trees and creeping shadows. Jake swallowed hard, the weight of 10 months without answers pressing down on him heavier than ever. But that brief, terrifying glimpse, those two boys and the figure watching them, rekindled a fierce flame inside. He squared his shoulders, voice low but resolute. We have to get down there. Cole's eyes met Jake's, a silent understanding passing between them. The sheriff nodded grimly, already reaching into the storage compartment of the helicopter. He pulled out a worn survival pack, checking the contents with practiced efficiency: rope, knives, a flashlight, first aid supplies. No words were needed. The urgency in Jake's voice said it all. As the helicopter slowed, settling onto a small, uneven clearing near the edge of the dense woods, Jake caught something unusual out of the corner of his eye. A strange marking etched deep into the bark of a towering pine. The symbol was unlike anything he had seen before. A jagged spiral entwined with angular lines, carved with deliberate precision. He reached out, tracing the rough grooves with a trembling finger, a chill running through him. This isn't just about lost boys anymore, Jake muttered, voice barely above a whisper. The forest around them seemed to pulse, alive with secrets and shadows that refused to be understood. Whatever was out here with Lucas and Ethan was older, deeper, and darker than any of them could have imagined. The dense forest around them seemed to press closer with every cautious step. Jake's eyes flicked to the symbol carved into the rough bark of the nearest tree. Its jagged lines burned into his memory like a warning. The air hung heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, but beneath it lay something darker, an intangible tension that made the hairs on the back of Jake's neck rise. Sheriff Cole moved ahead, his boots barely making a sound on the soft forest floor, his voice low but steady as he called out, "Lucas? Ethan?" The words were swallowed almost instantly by the towering trees, their echoes lost in the stillness. Marcus's face tightened as he scanned the shadowed canopy above and the tangled undergrowth below. His pilot instincts, honed over years of reading landscapes from the sky, screamed that this was no ordinary forest. The trees here were unnaturally close, their branches weaving a near impenetrable roof that blocked out the sun. The shadows beneath seemed darker, as if absorbing light rather than reflecting it. "This place isn't right," Marcus murmured, barely audible. Suddenly, a sharp, rhythmic whistle cut through the silence. It was faint but distinct, a deliberate pattern that set Jake's heart racing. Recognition surged through him like a jolt. "That's their signal," he breathed, urgency tightening his voice. "Lucas and Ethan made that up, to call for help if they were ever in trouble." His eyes darted towards the source, straining through the thick brush. Without hesitation, the trio moved in the direction of the whistle, every sense on high alert. The sound led them to a jagged rocky outcrop, the stones slick with moss and rain. But as the last note faded, silence reclaimed the forest, swallowing the signal whole. No laughter, no footsteps, only the rustling of leaves stirred by an invisible breath. Jake's stomach knotted with unease. They were close, he could feel it, but the boys were nowhere to be seen. His gaze dropped to the ground, where the earth was broken by a series of footprints. Jake crouched low, heart pounding, and traced the marks with a trembling hand. The prints were unlike any he'd seen before. Some were large and heavy, others uneven and dragged along as if something or someone had been pulled forcibly. The edges of the prints were smeared, the dirt packed down in unnatural patterns. The dragging marks sent a cold shiver crawling up Jake's spine, freezing the breath in his chest. "They weren't alone," Jake said, his voice tight with disbelief and fear. He looked up slowly, eyes wide, the weight of the truth settling heavily on his shoulders. And whoever or whatever was with them left this trail. The fire sputtered, casting flickering shadows that danced like restless spirits among the thick trunks surrounding their campsite. Jake crouched close to the warmth, the smoky scent filling his lungs, but his mind was far from comfort. The forest around them felt alive, not with animals or insects, but something else. A low, eerie murmur drifted through the trees, whispering in tongues just beyond comprehension. Eyes glimmered faintly in the darkness, too many to count, watching from unseen perches, peering from behind twisted branches. Sheriff Cole sat nearby, his broad frame relaxed but alert, fingers tightening instinctively on the grip of his revolver. Even his steady gaze flickered toward the blackened woods, betraying the unease Jake sensed but refused to fully admit. Marcus fiddled with a handheld radio, frustration darkening his face as static hissed and crackled, drowning out any hope of contact. The compass lay useless on the cracked leather map case, spinning like a top. Jake's thoughts spiraled. Where were Lucas and Ethan? Were they imprisoned somewhere, hiding, or worse, did something unspeakable hold them captive? The forest's silence had a weight, suffocating and unnatural. His heartbeat thrummed in his ears as he scanned the shadows, every snap of twig or rustle setting his nerves ablaze. Suddenly, a sharp rustling near the brush snapped their attention. Hands went to weapons in a heartbeat. Jake's breath caught as the firelight illuminated a gaunt figure stepping cautiously into the clearing. The man's wild eyes darted from one face to another, his thin frame draped in ragged clothing, unarmed but trembling with urgency. "I mean no harm," the stranger rasped, voice cracked like dry wood, barely louder than the fire's hiss. "I've lived here alone for years." His gaze was haunted, and despite his warning, there was something raw, desperate beneath his wary expression. Cole motioned for calm but kept his gun trained. "Who are you? What do you want?" His voice was firm, commanding respect, but carried an edge of caution. The hermit swallowed hard, glancing nervously over his shoulder as if expecting unseen eyes to close in. "There are things here, things that watch," he whispered, voice trembling. "Not men, not animals. The Watchers. They prey on those who dare enter the woods without respect. They hunger. They wait." Jake's stomach twisted. The stories he'd heard before seemed childish now, but the man's warning felt too real to dismiss. "Where are the boys?" Jake asked, eyes searching the hermit's face for any hint of truth. The hermit's lips thinned. "I've seen them moving through the shadows, but not free. Something holds them. Something old. You don't want to be here when it strikes." He took a step back, voice dropping to a bare whisper. "You need to leave before it's too late." Jake's fingers clenched the edge of his jacket, mind racing between hope and fear. The forest was no longer just trees and trails. It was a cage, a living entity that watched, waited, and threatened. Marcus looked at Jake and Cole, his face pale under the firelight. Cole's jaw tightened, the lawman's resolve tested by the eerie truth settling like fog around them. The fire flickered again, shadows elongating and twisting as if the forest itself breathed. Jake swallowed hard, fighting the cold grip of dread that crept over his soul. He knew the night ahead would be long, filled with unseen eyes and whispered threats. But there was no turning back, not while Lucas and Ethan still wandered these haunted woods. "You need to leave before it's too late," the hermit warned, voice low and cracked. The chill of dawn seeped through the thick canopy, the cold gray light casting long, twisted shadows over the forest floor. Jake's breath came out in visible puffs as he stepped cautiously forward, eyes fixed on the gnarled trees that surrounded them. The hermit's warning, The desperate plea to leave before it was too late clanged in his mind like a distant bell, but there was no turning back now. The ache in Jake's chest pushed him onward, desperation fueling every step. Beside him, Sheriff Cole moved with steady purpose, his weathered face hardening with each passing moment. Marcus, usually the one cracking jokes to ease the tension, was quiet now, his usual bravado drained by the eerie atmosphere pressing down on them. They followed a narrow, winding path marked by strange symbols crudely carved into the bark of trees, circles and jagged lines arranged in patterns that felt both ancient and deliberate. Jake knelt to examine one closely, tracing a finger over the rough cuts. These markings weren't random graffiti. They were warnings or directions left by someone or something that wanted to be found or avoided. Ahead, the scent of cold ash drifted on the damp air, drawing them like a magnet. Marcus pointed to a cluster of blackened stones nestled among the roots of a fallen tree. "Campfire," he said quietly. "But it's fresh. Couldn't be more than a few weeks old." Jake swallowed hard. The thought that someone had been here recently, so close to where the boys had vanished, tightened a knot deep inside him. "They're still out here," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. They pressed deeper, the forest thickening, swallowing the weak morning light. The silence around them was suffocating, broken only by the occasional crunch of leaves beneath their boots or the distant call of a crow. Jake's eyes darted nervously, every rustle raising his pulse. The hermit's words echoed in his thoughts, about a secret group living deep in these woods, guarding something ancient and dangerous. The boys might have stumbled into this hidden world, something far beyond a simple disappearance. Suddenly, Marcus halted, his hand shooting up to stop the others. Ahead, nestled in a small clearing, was a makeshift campsite. Tattered tents sagged against tree trunks, faded and stained. Scattered belongings littered the ground, empty food wrappers, a half-burnt candle, a cracked water bottle. The place reeked of neglect and haste. Jake's eyes scanned the scene, heart pounding. There was no sign of life, but the campsite told a story of sudden departure, or worse, a struggle. His gaze caught something tangled in the underbrush near one of the tents, a small scrap of fabric. He stepped closer, breath catching as he recognized it instantly. "Lucas's jacket," Jake said hoarsely, bending down to retrieve the torn piece snagged on a low branch. The fabric was frayed, dirty, stained with soil and something darker that made his stomach twist. He clenched it tightly, the weight of the discovery crushing. Cole's face tightened. "They were here," he said grimly, voice low but firm. "And someone took them." If that moment sent chills down your spine, don't stay silent. Subscribe and become a member, because finding truth requires courage and persistence. The torn fabric lay limp in Jake's trembling hands, its rough edges catching on the brittle twigs beneath him. He knelt at the makeshift campsite, eyes fixed on the faded blue jacket, Lucas's jacket. His breath came in shallow bursts, the cold seeping deep into his bones, but his focus never wavered. Sheriff Cole moved methodically around the perimeter, his sharp gaze picking out footprints pressed hard into the soft earth. "Look at this," Cole said quietly, pointing to a trail that led away from the tents. Some prints were small, child-sized, light as a whisper. Others were far larger, deeply uneven, as if the ground itself had been disturbed by something unnatural. Cole's jaw tightened. "This isn't normal." Marcus's eyes flicked nervously from shadow to shadow. The forest pressed closer around them, the trees arching overhead like towering sentinels. The wind rustled through the leaves with an eerie rhythm that seemed almost deliberate, like whispered warnings. "It's like the woods don't want us here," Marcus muttered, voice low, fingers twitching near his radio. But the device had gone silent again, dead in this part of the forest. Jake's mind flashed to the hermit's words, his cracked voice echoing louder in his thoughts. "The Watchers are real. They see everything." The forest felt alive with eyes, hidden, unseen, but unmistakably present. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the brush, made Jake's heart leap. Was it fear, or something far worse? That night, The group made camp a short distance from the disturbed area, cautious but unable to turn back. The fire sputtered weakly, casting long shadows that danced unervingly between the trees. Jake sat close to the flames, restless, his eyes scanning the darkness. His hands clenched and unclenched on his knees, the weight of the unknown pressing down on him like a stone. "Do you think the boys are close?" Marcus asked, breaking the silence, voice barely above a whisper. His usual bravado was gone, replaced by something raw and uncertain. Jake swallowed hard, forcing a steady tone. "They have to be. This was their camp. Someone took them from here, or they left in a hurry." Sheriff Cole stood guard, his silhouette rigid and alert, his fingers never straying far from the holster at his side. "We keep watch in shifts," he said firmly. "No one lets their guard down." As the night deepened, strange sounds began to weave through the forest, a distant laughter that seemed too light, too eerie for the stillness. Whispers that tangled in the wind, spoken in a language that clawed at Jake's mind without revealing meaning. The shadows seemed to stretch and pulse, warping with a life of their own. Jake lay on his back just beyond the firelight, staring up at a sky half hidden by swaying branches. His breath fogged in the cold air, heart pounding so loudly it nearly drowned out the mysterious murmurs. He was wide awake, every sense heightened. "They're watching," he murmured to himself, eyes darting toward the tree line. The feeling wasn't just in his head. It was a presence, patient, waiting, cold. Memories of nightmares crept back. Lucas and Ethan trapped in dark cages, their faces pale and desperate. The thought tightened Jake's chest until he could hardly breathe. He rolled onto his side, trying to steady the trembling in his hands. "We're not alone," he whispered, voice raw with fear and determination. "And they know we're here." The morning mist clung stubbornly to the forest floor as Jake, Sheriff Cole, and Marcus pressed forward, each step sinking slightly into the damp earth. The dense canopy above filtered the pale light, casting shifting shadows that seemed to dance with unseen movement. Broken branches snapped underfoot, and the scent of moss and damp would fill the air, heavy and oppressive. The trail had twisted into a labyrinth of confusion. Twigs snapped off in haste. Patches of disturbed underbrush hinted at hurried passage, but no clear path forward. Jake's eyes flicked between the ground and the trees, his mind racing to connect the pieces left by the hermit's cryptic warnings and the physical evidence around them. "Stay sharp," Sheriff Cole murmured, his voice low but steady, hand resting near his holstered pistol. Years of tracking had taught him how to read the forest's subtle signs, but even he couldn't deny the uneasy feeling crawling up his spine. Marcus's usually calm demeanor was fraying. He stopped, fumbling with the handheld GPS once more. The screen blinked erratically, then went dark. "Damn it," Marcus muttered, glancing at the compass. It spun wildly, as if caught in some magnetic trap. "Nothing's working. It's like the forest is alive, messing with us." Jake swallowed hard, pushing down the surge of panic threatening to overtake him. He couldn't afford doubt now, not when they were so close. His breath came in shallow bursts, the cold air biting at his lungs as they moved deeper, every sound amplified, the rustle of leaves, distant bird calls, even their own footsteps. Suddenly, his gaze caught something unusual. Nestled between thick, twisting vines draping the jagged cliffside was a crude rope ladder. The wood rungs were worn, the rope frayed but freshly tied. The ladder swayed slightly in the faint breeze, as if waiting. Jake's heart hammered in his chest. "Look," he whispered, pointing. "This wasn't here long ago. Someone's been using it." Sheriff Cole stepped closer, eyes narrowing. "You sure?" Jake nodded, voice barely audible. "Fresh. We're on the right track." Carefully, they began the descent. The cliff was steep and unforgiving, the rope ladder creaking under their weight. Jake's hands trembled, sweat mingling with the cold moisture of the forest. Each step downward was measured and tense, the sound of distant muffled voices growing faint but unmistakable. At the bottom, hidden partially by overgrown bushes and shadows, was the entrance to a cavern. Its gaping mouth yawned in the dim light, darkness swallowing whatever lay inside. The air shifted here, cooler, damp, carrying a faint but unsettling scent of earth and something older, something forgotten. Jake crouched, pressing his ear to the rough stone wall. The muffled voices came again, low and urgent. His breath hitched as the reality sank in. The boys were close, but trapped. "We have to be careful," Sheriff Cole warned, glancing back to Marcus and Jake. His hand tightened on his weapon, muscles coiled for whatever lay beyond the darkness. Jake's mind raced, balancing hope and fear. The thought of Lucas and Ethan, friends and brothers, held captive in this shadowed place fueled a determination that steadied his shaking limbs. This was no longer a search through lost trails and fading clues. It was a rescue. He looked once more at the cave entrance, swallowing the knot of dread in his throat. "This has to be where they're held," he said, his voice barely a whisper. The cavern's gloom pressed in like a suffocating shroud as Jake's eyes slowly adjusted to the dim light. The faint flicker of lantern flames cast wavering shadows on the jagged walls, making the chamber seem alive, breathing, watching. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and something far more unsettling: decay. Every breath Jake took felt heavy, like inhaling the weight of months lost in darkness. Ahead, tangled in coarse ropes, were the boys. Lucas and Ethan lay on rough-hewn wooden pallets, their faces pale, eyes dull but flickering with faint life. Jake's heart slammed against his ribs. Relief surged, raw and overwhelming, a wave crashing through the cold dread that had gripped him for so long. He wanted to rush to them, to pull them free, but the cold reality of the room snapped him back. This was no simple rescue. A small group of men stood clustered near the chamber's far side, their faces unreadable masks beneath the flickering light. Their eyes glinted with something far darker than mere suspicion, hard, unyielding resolve. They moved with a slow, purposeful grace that spoke of discipline and danger. These were no ordinary captors. Jake recognized the symbols etched faintly into their worn leather garments, markings that spoke of an ancient, secret cult bound to the forest's darker mysteries. Men who believed the woods were sacred and that anyone disturbing its depths deserved punishment. Jake's fists clenched at his sides, knuckles whitening. Every muscle tensed as his mind raced, piecing together a plan from scraps of hope and desperation. He couldn't show weakness. Any sign would tip the balance toward disaster. His gaze locked on Sheriff Cole and Marcus, who stood a few steps behind him, eyes sharp, hands near their weapons but restrained. They understood the stakes: one wrong move, and this fragile moment could shatter. Stepping forward, Jake forced his voice steady, even as his pulse thundered in his ears. "We don't want trouble," he said, trying to buy time, to gauge the men's intent. "Just let the boys go. They don't belong here." The tallest man detached himself from the group, stepping into the flickering light. His face was weathered, lines carved deep by years of conviction and something colder: fanaticism. His eyes, steel gray and unblinking, bore into Jake with a chilling certainty. "You don't understand what you're dealing with," he said, voice low and sharp as a blade. The cavern's dim light flickered against damp stone walls, casting long shadows that danced like restless spirits. Jake's voice, steady but edged with urgency, broke the heavy silence. "Please let them go. We'll give you anything, anything. Just let the boys walk free." He locked eyes with the cult leader, a man whose face was carved with years of fanaticism, whose cold gaze was unmoving as granite. The leader's voice cut through the cavern like a blade, low and commanding. "The forest's secrets are not for outsiders to claim. Those who disturb its balance must pay the price." Jake's heart pounded fiercely, rage and desperation twisting inside him. He knew pleading would not sway these men. Brute force was impossible here, in this maze of shadows and whispers. He glanced at Marcus, whose eyes flicked toward Sheriff Cole, an unspoken plan unfolding between them. Quietly, with practiced ease, Marcus moved toward the boys, his hands steady as he began to untie the ropes binding their wrists. Sheriff Cole stayed close, scanning every corner, every flicker of movement. Time was running thin. Suddenly, a sharp clang echoed through the cavern. A hidden bell swinging on a rusted chain, its sound reverberating like a death knell. The cult members stirred instantly, their wild eyes flaring as they surged toward Jake and his friends. The calm shattered. "Get back!" Cole barked, drawing his weapon with practiced precision. Jake's fists clenched, every muscle taut. The cavern was alive with shouting, the scrape of boots against stone, the clash of desperate hands. He fought with the fierce love of a brother, pushing, dodging, throwing himself between attackers and the boys. Marcus was a shadow in the fray, keeping the cultists at bay, eyes sharp, every move calculated. Despite the chaos, Jake kept stealing glances at Ethan, who was struggling to break free. With a sudden burst of courage, Ethan slipped from the loose bindings and lunged for a fallen weapon, a rusted crowbar lying just out of reach moments before. Grasping it, he turned, his hands shaking but determined. The gleam of the weapon caught the flickering light as he raised it in defense, a silent roar burning in his chest. The air suddenly shifted. A distant, powerful roar rolled through the cavern's mouth, muffled yet undeniable. The cultists froze, eyes wide with confusion and fear. Jake's breath caught, hope flickering like a fragile flame. "What was that?" he gasped, his voice barely above a whisper. The cavern trembled with the deafening roar of the helicopter slicing through the night air. Its spotlight pierced the thick shadows like a blade, casting jagged patterns of light across the faces of the cult members. They stumbled backward, blinded and disoriented, their tight formation breaking apart as fear crept into their eyes. The air was thick with tension, the clash of desperation and hope palpable. Jake's heart thundered in his chest, adrenaline surging through his veins as he held Lucas close, feeling the boy's fragile body shudder against his own. Tears blurred Jake's vision, but he forced himself to focus. "We're almost out," he whispered, voice trembling but determined. The sound of footsteps, firm, steady, echoed behind them as Sheriff Cole's deputies flooded into the cavern, their flashlights cutting through the gloom and weapons drawn with precision and purpose. "Stay close," Cole barked, his gruff voice a lifeline amid the chaos. The cult members scrambled to regroup, but the sudden arrival of the reinforcements shattered their resolve. A few shouted commands, but their words dissolved into frantic curses as deputies rounded them up, cuffs clicking, orders shouted in controlled authority. Ethan appeared from the shadows, battered and bruised but alive. His lips curved into a weak, grateful smile as he limped toward Jake and Lucas. Jake knelt down, wrapping an arm protectively around Ethan's shoulders. "You made it," Jake said, his voice thick with relief and disbelief. Ethan nodded, swallowing hard, eyes shining with a mixture of exhaustion and quiet pride. Around them, the cavern was alive with the low murmur of arrests, the clatter of equipment, and the steady hum of the helicopter overhead. Jake glanced up at the spotlight, its relentless beam sweeping the cavern's walls, revealing the depth of their prison and the weight of the ordeal they had endured. Cole approached, his expression stern but relieved. "They're in custody," he confirmed. "We've got enough to bring them all down." Jake's mind reeled with conflicting emotions: relief, anger, sorrow, and something deeper, an unsettling awareness that the forest still held secrets darker than anyone could imagine. He looked down at Lucas, who was trembling, eyes wide but alive. "It's over," Jake whispered, though his voice barely convinced him. The helicopter's rotors grew louder, shaking the ground beneath them. Jake felt the ground fall away as the aircraft lifted off, the cavern shrinking beneath them until it was nothing but a shadow swallowed by the night. From above, the forest stretched endlessly, dark and silent, a vast unknown that had tested them all. As the cool night air rushed past him, Jake's gaze locked onto the trees below, his thoughts heavy. The scars this night had left were invisible but no less real. The weight of what they had survived settled deep inside him, settling like a slow ache that would not fade. "We're safe now," Jake whispered, "but we'll never forget." The air in Eldridge was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth as the sun dipped low behind the hills. The town, usually so quiet and still, now carried a different weight, a mix of relief and lingering sorrow. At the modest house near the edge of town, Lucas and Ethan sat on the worn couch, their faces pale but slowly gaining color. The room was filled with soft murmurs of concern and gentle touches as family and friends surrounded them, their presence a quiet shield against the darkness they had endured. Jake stood nearby, his eyes never leaving his brother's fragile form. The ordeal had changed Lucas, and Jake could see it in the tight lines around his eyes, in the way he flinched at sudden noises, as if the forest's shadows still clung to him. Outside, the evening breeze stirred the curtains, carrying the distant sounds of children playing and neighbors greeting one another, normalcy trying to reassert itself. Yet beneath the surface, Jake felt the weight of everything they had uncovered pressing down on him. He was a quiet hero now, not because he sought the title, but because he had faced something most couldn't understand and brought his brother back from it. His hands, roughened from the months of searching, rested on the window frame, gripping tightly as his mind replayed the faces of those men in the cavern, the secret cult guarding ancient, dangerous knowledge. Across town, Sheriff Cole sat in his office, the dim glow of the desk lamp casting long shadows on the walls lined with maps and case files. He rubbed the back of his neck, tired but resolute. The ordinance to protect Black Pine Ridge was now his mission, a promise made to the families and a safeguard against anyone who might exploit the forest's mysteries. The sheriff's voice was steady as he spoke to a city councilman over the phone. "We can't let this happen again. That place holds more than just trees. It holds secrets we're only beginning to understand." Meanwhile, Marcus packed away his flight gear in the quiet hangar, the metal clinks echoing softly in the vast space. His usually confident demeanor was tempered with a shadow of unease. He glanced up at the ceiling, remembering the feeling of being watched high above the treetops, the strange silence that swallowed their radios. The faces he had seen in the forest haunted his thoughts, not just the boys, but something darker lurking beneath. His voice was low when he finally spoke to himself. Some things don't want to be found. As night fully settled, Jake found himself drawn to the edge of the woods, the thick trees standing like silent sentinels against the fading light. He stepped onto the soft moss, the forest floor cool beneath his boots, and breathed deeply, trying to steady the storm inside him. The shadows seemed to shift with the breeze, whispering secrets he couldn't quite grasp. He knew the forest was watching still, patient and unyielding. His jaw tightened as he whispered, "Some mysteries are better left untouched." But his hand rested on the pendant around his neck, a small token Lucas had given him long ago, a reminder that some battles were worth fighting. The weight of the past months settled into his bones, but beneath the exhaustion, a fierce resolve burned. The forest had changed them all, left scars no one else could see. And though the world had turned back toward peace, Jake's eyes scanned the darkness ahead, ready for whatever might come next. "We survived," he said softly. "And that's just the beginning. The search continues, but hope remains alive. If you stand for justice, answers, and resilience, hit subscribe and join the channel. Together we rise." Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional, created to explore themes of mystery, hope, and the unexpected twists in search and rescue. Its purpose is to engage viewers and inspire reflection on courage and perseverance.